Bulgaria has delivered one of its most decisive electoral outcomes in decades, handing former President Rumen Radev and his Progressive Bulgaria party a commanding lead with 44.7% of the vote, far ahead of established political forces. For a country that has gone through 8 elections in 5 years, this result signals a potential reset. But beneath the surface, it raises a more complex question about whether Bulgaria's political direction inside the European Union and NATO could begin to shift in measurable ways. The scale of the result is significant. With 91.7% of ballots counted, Progressive Bulgaria's share places it more than 30 percentage points ahead of its nearest competitors. The pro-European We Continue the Change Democratic Bulgaria coalition secured 13.2%, while the long-dominant GERB party, led by former Prime Minister Boyko Borissov, reached 13.4%. This gap suggests that Radev could potentially form a government without coalition partners, although he has left open the possibility of cooperation with smaller or pro-European groups. To understand how Bulgaria reached this point, it is necessary to examine the country's political trajectory since the end of communism in 1989. Bulgaria transitioned into a parliamentary democracy and joined the European Union in 2007. Integrating into Western political and economic structures. Over time, however, recurring allegations of corruption, institutional inefficiency, and uneven economic gains eroded public trust in established parties. This dissatisfaction translated into repeated elections, fragmented parliaments, and short-lived governments. Radev's rise is closely tied to this environment. A former fighter pilot and previously a largely ceremonial president, he stepped down from that role in January to contest parliamentary power after protests forced the previous government to resign in December. His campaign positioned itself against entrenched elites and emphasized national sovereignty, economic concerns, and a recalibration of foreign policy priorities. While not explicitly anti-European, his stance has been described as Eurosceptic, particularly regarding energy policy and relations with Russia. Foreign policy is where the implications become more complex. Bulgaria is both a member of NATO and part of the European Union, and it joined the Eurozone in January, adopting the euro as its currency. Radev has criticized aspects of this integration, including what he views as over-reliance on renewable energy within EU frameworks. He has also advocated for restoring more stable energy relations with Russia, particularly in oil and gas flows, which had historically been central to Bulgaria's energy supply. At the same time, his messaging has remained deliberately flexible. He has indicated a willingness to maintain Bulgaria's broader European trajectory and cooperate on judicial reforms with pro-European factions. Analysts therefore interpret his position as a balancing strategy rather than a clear pivot. This ambiguity reflects the structural constraints Bulgaria faces as an EU and NATO member, where major policy reversals would carry significant economic and political costs. Domestic pressures are equally important. Bulgaria has a population of around 6.5 million and has experienced measurable economic progress since EU accession, including low unemployment rates and improved institutional safeguards after adopting the euro. However, cost of living concerns have intensified, particularly following the currency transition and fiscal proposals that included higher taxes and social security contributions. These economic tensions contributed directly to the protests that brought down the previous government. The current result can therefore be seen as a convergence of political fatigue and economic pressure. Voters appear to have prioritized stability and change simultaneously, supporting a candidate who promises both a break from established parties and a functioning government after years of fragmentation. The question now is whether that mandate translates into coherent policy direction. If this political shift consolidates, one scenario involves Radev forming a stable single-party government and gradually adjusting Bulgaria's external positioning. In this case, changes would likely be incremental rather than abrupt, focusing on energy policy, diplomatic tone, and selective engagement with Russia while maintaining formal commitments to EU and NATO frameworks. Such an approach could introduce subtle but meaningful shifts in regional alignment, particularly in the Black Sea area. A second scenario involves internal constraints limiting the scope of change. Even with a strong electoral mandate, institutional checks, coalition dynamics, if they emerge, and EU regulatory frameworks could restrict policy deviation. In this outcome, Bulgaria would remain broadly aligned with European policies on Ukraine, sanctions, and energy diversification, while domestic reforms become the primary focus of the government's agenda. The geopolitical consequences depend on which path materializes. Bulgaria occupies a strategic position on the EU's southeastern flank and along the Black Sea, making its policy orientation relevant to regional security calculations. Any perceived softening toward Moscow would be closely monitored by both European partners and NATO allies, particularly in the context of ongoing tensions involving Ukraine. At the same time, the election result reflects a broader trend within Europe, where voter dissatisfaction with traditional parties is reshaping political landscapes. Bulgaria's case stands out due to the scale of the victory and the potential for single-party governance after years of instability. This creates a test case for whether strong mandates can restore functionality without significantly altering international alignments. Economically, the government faces immediate challenges. Analysts, including Sofia-based policy experts, have identified the economic and demographic situation as central concerns. Bulgaria continues to experience population decline alongside structural economic pressures, which require long-term policy responses rather than short-term adjustments. The absence of detailed proposals from the winning camp on these issues adds another layer of uncertainty. As the new political phase begins, attention will focus on cabinet formation, legislative priorities, and early policy signals. Markets, European institutions, and regional actors will assess whether rhetoric translates into action, particularly in areas such as energy contracts, fiscal policy, and judicial reform. What this moment ultimately represents is not a definitive shift, but a recalibration point. Bulgaria has moved from fragmentation to concentration of political power, but the direction of that power remains partially undefined. The balance between domestic expectations and external commitments will determine the trajectory. For observers, the key indicators to watch include how Radev manages relations with EU institutions, whether economic pressures ease or intensify, and how Bulgaria positions itself within ongoing regional tensions. Stability, in this context, is not simply the absence of elections, but the presence of coherent governance. Whether this result delivers that outcome will shape Bulgaria's role in Europe in the months ahead.